Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hello. Hi, Gabby. We're expecting quite a large audience today, so we'll wait a couple of minutes until everyone joins. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Morning, Kezia. Morning, Bobby. Oh, there's a lot of feedback. Can you check your speakers, maybe? Morning. Hi, Mark. Hi, Gary. Hi, David. Morning, Kieran. We'll just give everyone just one more minute until everyone's ready and signed up. Hi, Ian. Good morning. Hi, Tim. Morning, all. Hi, Dimitrios. Good to see you. Hi, Tobe. Tonia, hi. All right. As the list is growing, I think we can make a start. So good morning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Local Net Zero Targets and Behavior Change. This is our third webinar in a series where we look at the role of behavior change interventions across industry with a particular focus on all things net zero. These events are in collaboration with ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. And this is to bring actionable insights from social science to any kind of business and industry challenges. And today we're talking about a place-first approach to net zero targets and how behavior change fits into that picture. My name is Alexandra Joguranu. I'm from Innovate UK KTN. And in my day-to-day, I explore the role of social sciences in business innovation. And for context, for those of you who've not stumbled upon Innovate UK KTN before, we're a business connector organization. At KTN, we connect people for positive change in society, from our diverse business communities to the academics that we work with, to investors and funders. And our strategic priorities cover net zero, place, diversity and inclusion, adoption and diffusion. And at the core of all of that is the ambition to deliver societal and environmental impact while continuing to work the work that we do for economic benefits. And today in this session, I'm truly excited to partner with the Net Zero Places Innovation Network to bring you this session. We have some amazing speakers today, and our excellent chair is my colleague Neelam Banks, who leads the network. Before passing on to her for the rest of the session, just a few housekeeping rules from me. So you'll see that your audio is muted and your video is turned off. If you have any kind of technical issues, please report them to Michael Foster. You can chat to him directly. He's the facilitator for this webinar. And if you have any questions, we will have a Q&A session later. Please submit all of your questions in the Q&A. There's a tab at the bottom of your Zoom. We'll collate all of your questions and answer as many as we have time for in the dedicated session at the end of the webinar. And as a bonus for the 3 top voted questions in the Q&A, we are giving away a copy of a book called Energize, The Secret of Motivation. And this is a small and insightful book on behavior and motivation, quite apt for today's topic. So remember to upvote your favorite questions, and the top 3 will receive a copy of that book. This session is being recorded, and any additional event materials plus this recording will be distributed to everyone attending in due course. Now, that's all from me. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy this session. Neelam, over to you.
Thanks, Alexandra, and thank you for inviting us to take part in this series. And thank you all for joining us today or potentially watching later. I guess starting from the beginning, behaviour change and influence in communities, will play an important role for the UK to meet net zero targets by 2050. In the latest Mission Zero review by Chris Skidmore, it was highlighted again that 30% of greenhouse gas emissions reductions needed to deliver net zero strategy rely on local authorities' involvement, while also local authorities have an 82%, influence 82% of emissions within their area. So looking at these, there is a need for local authorities to take into consideration behaviour change, to engage with their communities and the activities within their area. And with 74% of local authorities, these include district, county, unitary, metropolitan councils who have declared a climate emergency in February 2021, there is a need for movement in this area and real focus. At Innovate UK KTN, we created Net Zero Places, which aims to help net zero become a reality in the UK. We do this by supporting local and regional authorities and agencies to connect, collaborate, inform, share experiences, lessons learned, to adopt innovation and level up across the UK. So if you haven't joined the network, please do, because we do hold a lot of activities. And one of the first challenges that we heard from the authorities that we engaged was behaviour change. So it's been a great pleasure working with Alexandra and Sarah from ESRC to deliver this webinar, where we will be giving an overview of the motivations and COM-B model for behaviour change, as well as try to clarify the role of middle actors in the energy and building sectors, as well as other net zero themes. So hopefully from these presentations, you'll be able to see where you might use these ideas, who are the middle actors and who can help you to achieve net zero goals in your area, what opportunities would align with existing motivations, enhance activities on net zero, and how might you systemically identify opportunities, motivations, and current capabilities and needs. With all of this in mind, if you are a local authority and you do need a bit more resource or a bit more help to meet net zero by removing systemic barriers and the non-technical barriers, please do sign up to Fast Followers competition, which has been launched recently by Innovate UK. I hope that the link will be shared with you in the chat now. But if you have any questions around that funding call, please do get in touch. So let's go back to the webinar. So the lineup today, we'll first hear from Professor Alice Owen from the University of Leeds, and she'll be covering what are middle actors and why do they matter for net zero. This will be followed by a pre-recorded presentation by Dr. Neve Murdoch from UCL, who's kindly arranged this recording to happen. Neve will be presenting on the motivations for net zero behaviours and the COM-B model and behaviour change. This will be followed by discussion, which I'll be facilitating. So please do add your questions. Kieran, I can see you've got a question there, which I think Alexandra is responding to right now. And as Alexandra mentioned, the top 3 voted questions will receive a book. So please do get your thinking caps on. So first off, we've got Alice. Alice, are you ready to go?
I'm certainly here. So thank you very much, Nilam. As I've been watching the variety of participants scroll through on the Hello, the diversity of working contexts that you're in is extraordinary, and there's going to be a real challenge here about making sure that the content is relevant and useful to everyone. But let's dive in and see if we can make it useful and relevant. I'm now going to attempt to share my screen. We have, of course, rehearsed this. That's no guarantee that it's necessarily going to go smoothly, but if I do that, hopefully you can see some screens, and somebody, possibly Michael, will yell at me.
It's perfect, Alice. It's good to
excellent.
go.
Here's hoping we continue in that vein. So my focus is this idea of middle actors. I'll explore what they are, and at the end, who they might be for the context that you're working in, and the influence that they have on the plans and projects that we need to undertake to achieve net zero. I'm a researcher in sustainability and business. I focus particularly in the construction industry, and I work on place-based approaches, which is why I was particularly keen to participate in this webinar series. Place-based is a term that we hear all the time, and it's fundamentally rooted in the idea that while we need to achieve the same outcomes, the ways in which we do that are going to be different in different contexts. And I'm fortunate enough to be supported in doing that research. A couple of the array of logos across the bottom of the screen is to give you a flavour of that. I'm part of the Place-Based Climate Action Network, PCAN, which is an ESRC Network Plus, and the PRINS, which is Productivity and Inclusive Net Zero Analysis Project with LSE and Imperial. That's another ESRC investment. And I work with the Innovation Caucus, which is ESRC and Innovate UK combined. So it's great to be able to bring some of the research into this conversation. So challenge one, moving the slides along. Fantastic. The first thing I need to say really clearly is that the concept of the middle actor and the middle out perspective is not one that I have originated. It's one that I found exceptionally useful in structuring and organising and thinking about my research. It was developed by Yalparag and Katie Janda at UCL, and their research, they've applied the middle out perspective to a lot of different arena. If it's an idea that you're interested in, but what I say doesn't quite hit the context you're working in, I'd really recommend, they've got a 3-minute video on YouTube that kind of introduces the middle out perspective. So I just wanted to make it really clear that the originators of the idea are elsewhere. But let me introduce how I understand and use the concept of middle actors and the middle out perspective. It's pre-lunchtime. I'm hoping this won't necessarily bring on too many hunger pangs too early. But if we think about how does change, what are the agents of change in a national picture, and what are the directions through which we try to affect change nationally in the context of place-based net zero, we've got, and this deliberately the sandwich, we're looking at it from the top here, because in my world, we quite often start with policy making, a kind of top-down approach. What regulation, what incentives, what information can we put in place to push out the idea of net zero and targets in this case. So and in a national perspective, the kind of couple of the key big actors would be BEIS and would be MHCLG, who are then kind of pushing down ideas of policy targets and incentives and responding to a series of bottom-up pressures. BEIS's net zero agenda, you might see that as being countered, reinforced by something like Extinction Rebellion. MHCLG's kind of planning perspective, you might see that again being sometimes in tension with and sometimes reinforced by people like CPRE. And the bottom-up kind of pressures for change come from citizens, come from consumers, and they're much more of what we might think of a grassroots and a distributed approach. So we've got top-down and bottom-up as two ways of achieving change. And then you can see the same in local picture as well. So the top-down would be the local authorities or combined authorities. The same kind of mechanisms available, seen through climate emergency declarations, setting of carbon budgets, or the neighbourhood plans, local traffic regulations, and bottom up, again, you're going to have a whole series of different actors at the local level, sometimes reinforcing, sometimes actually asking for different things. The point I'd make is that sandwich, while we tend to look at it from the top up, has got a filling in it, but it's the middle between the top down and the bottom up is considerably more than just filling. And this is what the middle out perspective tries to characterize and understand. So I'm going to finish with the food visuals now, but hopefully it's given you an anchor point to kind of think about the middle actors as complex, occasionally slightly messy, and quite difficult to contain and certainly to control. So the middle out perspective, to put it in slightly more formal framing here, you've got a top down from regulation and government and a bottom up set of pressures. And what the middle out does is say what happens between those two layers, okay? And the people in the middle who might be business groups, they might be supply chains, they might be real estate holding companies, they might be different forms of communities, such as communities of faith and religious practice. These set of middle actors have influence, and they have influence upstream about what policies and targets can legitimately be set. They have influence downstream to what campaigns and what consumer action actually gains traction. And they have influence sideways with groups of peers and other parts of their communities. And there's three ways in which that influence can be three different modes of influence, which are about enabling action and its converse, constraining action. They're about aggregating, and they're about mediating or changing and shaping. Now, anybody with any kind of consulting background will hear the siren call of a 3x3 matrix arising from this. And I hate to disappoint. So here we go. This is from a research paper that I produced with Kate Simpson at Imperial and Katie Janda. And we were looking at what the middle actors were in undertaking renovation of existing buildings, and the influence of those middle actors, predominantly small construction firms, in delivering a net zero outcome from renovation works. And so we analysed what they told us they were doing in terms of the way they tried to influence the outcomes of their projects and who they were influencing to do that. And to pick up a couple of examples here, professionals in terms of downstream, so to the customer, a small construction firm can absolutely influence downstream to enable or to limit the aspirations of their clients. And anybody who's contemplated building an extension or replacing a heating system will know there are different responses you can get from the people that you call in to give you a quote for that works. You know, there can be the absolutely, that's dead interesting. I heard some colleagues of mine did a job just like that up the road the other day. Yeah, we'll give you a price on that. Or there can be what we tend to get more of, the kind of, you as a client say, I'm really interested in whether or not it's worth going for one of these heat pumps. I can hear there are grants around and there's a lot of noise about it. I quite like the idea of doing the right thing by the environment. And you might well get an entirely legitimate, from where they're coming from, response that's much sucking of the teeth and kind of, yeah, I know they're giving you a grant, but the running costs are horrendous. And frankly, I don't know anybody who's happy with one, and so on and so forth. So while, and Neve's presentation will touch on this, while there are absolutely legitimate reasons why the influence is exercised in different ways, there are clear different modes of influence downstream from the small construction firm over what happens around a low carbon or not renovation. Another example would be where small construction firms operating in the same area, often using exactly the same supply chains, the local builder's merchant who extends them a line of credit, or the plumber's merchant, there are opportunities for sideways influence and to aggregate knowledge and expertise. So actually, people who bump into each other at 7:30 at the builder's merchant to get the materials that they're going to get that day, they're going to install on the jobs they're working on the things that are in stock at the builder's merchants, which may or may not be the things that the architects had put on their fancy drawings. But if there is sufficient requests for what is currently a non-standard material, or there is the demand for advice to get over the initial reluctance to try something new and risk your quality, your reputation for quality, then aggregating a kind of influence can then change the whole of what that set of middle actors in a situation came to do. So this kind of 3x3 analysis, I know it looks a bit management consulting, but it can help put some structure into that complex, messy middle. There is one other kind of way I want you to think about the complexity of middle actors. And this is particularly important, I think, for local authority project planning and the people who are applying local authorities. We have become, for good reason, completely enamored with the logic frame for our project planning that says there's some kind of top-down or bottom-up push coming in this nice neat blue arrow, kind of something pushing in from the left-hand side of your screen that leads to, through a series of logical steps, an intended effect on the right-hand side. And as I say, you know, the logic frame thinking about project planning completely encourages us to do this, and gives you lines of accountability and traceability and the like. Completely understand that makes good sense. But the problem is that because middle actors have agency, aren't necessarily operating to exactly the logic that you understand or assume, what happens is you have some kind of policy push or a consumer push for change. And that top-down or bottom-up intention meets the middle actors, who are varied in their approaches, although they've got the same kind of, that we assume they're often very similar. And then what the middle actors do with those intentions, they may well enable them or constrain them. They may mediate and change. They may aggregate, and you end up with an effect which might well be quite different to what your nice, neat logic frame project plan thought was going to happen. And that's why understanding what's driving middle actors and why they take the decisions they do to enable, mediate and aggregate is really important. Again, just to kind of try and make that a little less abstract, this is a diagram from some work I did several years ago now with Catherine Maybe, when we were looking at the networks of people that delivered renovations, repair and maintenance in localities, in owner-occupied homes in localities. And this diagram is just simply to illustrate that there are many different configurations of contracting between the individual homeowners, the clients, and the different layers of skills and contracting that go on. And there are different risk profiles for financial risk, but also different profiles of when decisions can be taken that deliver more or less low carbon outcomes. So I'm not going to go into detail in that, but again, it's worth thinking through what are the connections between middle actors that attenuate and change the intention. A couple of quick examples to try and bring this into context that hopefully are useful to some of you. So first example, hurrah, you've got some DFE money to refurbish a local secondary school. You've got a wish list as long as your arm about better space, better energy efficiency, on-site catering, better staff facilities, change to sports, performing arts space. Look, a very, very long wish list coming from all the people. So who are the middle actors in this? Well, you've got a bottom up, what the staff, the PTA and the students want. You've got a top down, what DFE expectations and either the Academy Trust or the local authority, whoever it is, kind of their expectations. And in between, you've got the architects who translate all those pushes into designs, the contractors, and within those, all the different trades who advise on what's viable, what's affordable, so on and so forth. There's the clerk of works who sort of signs off or not on progress. You've got the project managers, you've got the school facilities team who are going to be operating the kit afterwards. And without understanding how all those people will change and mediate between the top up and bottom, the top down and the bottom up pressures, you risk having projects that don't achieve the full potential, particularly in terms of net zero, but also in terms of all the other things that you want. And a second one, which is, this hasn't been hugely researched, so I am kind of slightly on a wing and a prayer here, but given that transport is a huge aspect of place-based decarbonisation, if you are seeking to increase the proportion of journeys made by active travel as part of your place-based decarbonisation, then you've got a set of top-down tools available to you around speed limits, public transport services, better infrastructure for cycling, whatever it might be. You've got a set of bottom-up pressures, which are not all nice distinct silos. These all overlap between what drivers want, what pedestrians who are also sometimes drivers want, what cyclists want, what public transport users who are also sometimes cyclists want, so on and so forth. And you've got middle actors, and I'm not aware of anybody who's systematically looked at the role of middle actors in low carbon transport, but I have to say, the more I've been reflecting on this in preparation for the webinar, I think it's ripe for some examination. So bus drivers, the highways engineers and contractors, and there are probably many others who take these two sets of top-down and bottom-up intentions and change them into the reality on the ground. The immediate question, you might be rolling your eyes at me at the moment and going, a bus driver, a middle actor, really? And I just, again, to give you something to kind of hold on to as an illustration, middle actors are often overlooked because we think we know what they do, and quite often we've experienced them doing what they do, but we don't understand necessarily the influence of them. So a bus driver takes your fares, drives the bus, hopefully safely, but they also mediate the experience of using the bus by either welcoming you or not, by making access easy or not, by sharing information, and potentially by just making your journey even more agreeable. And so as my kind of point to bring you something else to remember from this input, if you haven't already come across it, it's the National Express bus driver in the West Midlands who was a video sensation just before Christmas with his musical extravaganzas extolling the delights of bus driving as a vocation, are definitely worth experiencing, just to remind you that there is positivity in many, many unexpected places. To be fair, this wasn't done to improve customer experience on the bus, but I have to say it just made me think about what's the untapped potential of a set of middle actors that we never normally think about to actually change travel behaviours. So my final slide is the key points. Between the sandwiches and the bus drivers, what I've tried to say is that there can be many different groups who are middle actors, and they need to be acknowledged upstream in the design of policy. Think about how it will affect middle actors. Understand what they might do to enable or constrain, aggregate and mediate downstream, because that can help you unlock different routes to achieve change. But be aware that they also have a sideways influence which will be outside of your control, and you can't be assured of what will happen with middle actors. Which means it leads me on to my very final point and my segue into Neve's presentation, which is understanding who middle actors are is important. But why they do what they do is also worth focusing on, because that can encourage the new pathways to net zero and low carbon behaviours. So that little bit of text in orange there, why do they do what they do, is effectively another way of talking about motivations. And that at that point, I'll hand back to Nilam to take us into Neve's presentation.
Thanks, Alice. That was a great presentation. And yeah, there's plenty of questions in the Q&A, so please have a quick scan. Any questions about the funding call, I'll take offline. We won't be answering them in the Q&A. I have placed my email in the chat and also in the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please email me directly. So Michael, I think we're going to be sharing the pre-recorded presentation by Neve. Brilliant. It looks like we're ready to go. Okay, so over to you, Michael.
Hi, I'm Dr. Neve Murta, and I'm very pleased to be with you today, even if it is virtually. The topics I want to talk about are around human behaviour and understanding human behaviour when it comes to motivations for net zero transitions. And then I want to talk a little bit about a model of behaviour change that allows us to think systematically about how we can go about helping behaviour change towards net zero. Let me start with what is perhaps an obvious statement, which is that individuals matter. As Alice has explained so well, the middle actors in a system are crucial in terms of system change. And Alice's example from construction and retrofit is played out across any system and all of the systems in which we need transitions in order to get to net zero. When we're thinking about middle actors, we're thinking about individuals, and individuals play different roles in society. So we can be thinking about, for example, business owners and managers. And this, I think, is particularly important when we're thinking about SMEs, so small to medium enterprises, which employ about half of the workers in the country and are a backbone of the economy. And we know that owners and managers have a significant influence on the type of decisions that are made in running a business. We can think about employees. So although we often focus on individuals as consumers, certainly in the research arena we do, but we need to think beyond that and the role of people in their day-to-day jobs and how changes there can help that transition to net zero. When we're thinking about important individuals, we need to be considering local authorities, because our local authorities provide a critical area for influence on an interpretation of regulations, local policies, engagement of the general public, and so on. We often talk about the general public, but in fact there are many groups within that we need to identify. So if we're thinking about the built environment, for example, residential environment, we might be thinking about homeowners, landlords and tenants. If we're thinking about low traffic neighbourhoods, we might be thinking about parents, teachers, school children. And the point here is that people play multiple roles and can affect what goes on and what can be changed in different ways. We need to move on from an idea of an amorphous mass of the general public and general behaviour change to getting a lot more specific about the groups we're interested in and what specific changes we might want to see. So what do we know about individuals that can help us understand how behaviour change might happen? I want to talk about just a few important concepts. There are others, but these are worth our focus today. First of all, individuals are goal-oriented. The vast majority of people get up in the morning with specific goals in mind. They might have to get to work. They might need to manage a team, provide a service there. They might also need to make sure they're getting the shopping in for later. They might have caring responsibilities and they need to support their loved ones and so on. But people have intentions, they have goals, they have things they want to accomplish in their day and in their life. And we need to consider that when we want them to think about their behaviour and what they might do differently. People have values. Now, by values, we mean guiding principles in people's lives. And this is an area which has had a lot of attention in research. And the research has worked with tens of thousands of people and across, I believe, more than 60 countries. And from this, we know that people can have quite different values. So we can have people who are who value the environment and looking after the environment and value looking after others. We can have people for whom power and status and high earnings are what they value in life and see that that's the way their life should be lived. We have people who are important, who see tradition and routine as important, who want things to remain as they have done. And we have people who value creativity, innovation, difference. Now, we obviously, for any particular person, there's likely to be a mix of values that are important to them. But the important thing is that people want their lives and they want their behaviours to reflect their values. That's kind of the most comfortable position, if you like, to be able to live as your values suggest you should be living. And when we're thinking about behaviours and we're thinking about why people do what they do, recognition that different people come at their behaviours in quite different ways and they value different things is an important factor. People also have multiple identities. So a local planner might also be a parent, an employee might be a school governor, a business owner might also be a keen cyclist or a football fan or whatever. And so each person manages multiple identities into a kind of a coherent sense of self. And these hats we wear are very much important to us in how we see ourselves. And the hats we wear, of course, varies by context. So the obvious example is, in a context like this, our professional identities are to the forefront, but when we leave work, there will be other identities that are important to us. And a final point here is around what we call personal norms or moral norms. Here the idea is that the nature of people is that we have a sense of right and wrong, a personal sense of right and wrong, generally shared in society, although slightly individual as well. And we develop this as quite young children. And we want to do what's right. So the vast majority of people want to do what they feel is right. And if they are required to do something that they don't feel is in line with what they see as the right thing to do, again, that's an uncomfortable area for them to be in, and they want their behaviour to be something that they personally see as the right thing to do. And now let's look at motivation. Now, what we mean by motivation in psychology is the driving force behind people's behaviour. Behaviour doesn't happen in a vacuum. There is a force behind it, and we call that motivation. And what we understand is that there are a spectrum of motivations that can guide behaviour, that can drive behaviour. On the one hand, we've got what we call controlled motivations, and these are factors external to the person. So examples might be financial incentives, might be regulation and laws to do things in a particular way. Behaviour is likely to comply with these to an extent, so external or controlled motivations can work. But the behaviour then is dependent on those external factors. And what happens is with financial incentives, for example, the behaviour might comply with the incentives while they're there, but if the incentives are taken away or reduced, the behaviour is likely to come to an end. With regulation, we know that compliance is often aligned closely with the level of monitoring. So sometimes we know that if regulation isn't monitored, that some businesses won't comply. So these are some of the downsides of external motivations. There's another cluster of motivations that we call autonomous motivations, and these are motivations that are in some way internalised in the individual. So the individual does things because they see it as part of who they are, part of their identity, because it aligns with their values or their goals or their personal norms. And autonomous motivations, because they're independent of the external environment, tend to persist, and they tend to be the type of motivations that encourage people and facilitate people to continue with the behaviour, to persist even in the face of obstacles. And that is a very strong way of ensuring that behaviour will continue to happen. One note of caution when we're talking about the types of motivations, there is evidence that controlled motivations, such as a financial incentive, could and can undermine autonomous motivations. So, for example, when somebody is paid to do something, it often feels to them like they're doing it because somebody else wants them to do it, and there is a risk there. But having said that, it's worth seeing that there are a spectrum of motivations. There are different ways in which we can encourage people to behave in a particular way. So when it comes to motivations for transitioning to net zero, we can see that there are multiple motivations that could be important here. We know that the values relating to environmental concern, for example, will certainly mean people are more likely to get engaged with transitions to net zero. But equally, there are values that we might find more commonly within the business environment, for example. So cost saving can be a value in the business environment, and it mirrors frugality as quite a frequent value amongst people just not liking waste. We can see that reputation and future business are important values, usually for business owners. Competitive advantage and innovation also. And these are things that can align with net zero. So if we're looking for example, a move to renewables as cost cutting, that can appeal to a frugality value. If we're looking for innovation, new technologies, new products or services that are greener, that would enhance reputation. These are things that can align with motivations linked to values that go beyond the environmental. Similarly with identities, we know that an environmental identity will align with green behaviours, but also we have found in our own research that professional identities can also be in alignment. So our work with architects, for example, and town planners, we saw with them that the objectives they had as professionals, their pride in their professional role, did align with, for example, buildings that would be important over time and not need to be replaced within a short period of time. And with our town planners, the desire to ensure that sustainability and a better lived environment was something they delivered. So these meant that their professional identities did align with the type of things we would want to see for a net zero future. Beyond that, we also know that in work on transport, that, for example, the identity as a parent was a factor that linked to the choice people made whether to drive their child to school or to walk the child to school. And the stronger the identity as a parent, the more likely they were to walk their child to school. Similarly with personal norms, that although we know certainly and would expect that people with a personal norm around environmental impact are going to be engaged, probably already, in net zero transitions, there are other important personal norms that can also be brought into play, and these might be around climate justice and social equality. So now I'd like to move on for us to think about how we can go about trying to change behaviour to behaviours that will support a net zero transition. And I'd like to introduce the COM-B model. So COM stands for capabilities, opportunities and motivations. And the model sets out the understanding that for behaviour to occur, for the desired behaviour to occur, all of capabilities and motivations and opportunities need to be present and need to be aligned. So the model forces us to look at capabilities in the sense of the internal resources that people have. So whether they have, for example, the knowledge to carry out a particular behaviour, do they know what needs to be done? Do they know how to do it? It links into skills, for example. Do people have the physical skills or the perhaps mental capacity to do a particular behaviour? The opportunities label reminds us of the importance of the external environment. So the physical world in which we live does enable us to do things or constrain other actions. So when we're talking about external factors, for example, we might be talking about whether a cycle lane makes it easy to commute by bicycle. We might be talking about whether finance is available for a small business to invest in green technologies. And so this model, which is a well-established model of behaviour change, suggests that we need to think systematically about each of these headings, capabilities and motivations and opportunities. And we need to make sure they all align in order to enable the behaviour that we might want to see. So let's recap how the topics we've talked about have a bearing on net zero transition. First of all, remembering that people have multiple roles, many hats in society, and different roles can give different opportunities to encourage behaviour change. When we're looking to motivate people to get involved in net zero transitions, there are multiple motivations we can draw on, and we don't just have to restrict ourselves to talking about climate change or environment. We can look at wider motivations that align with what people want to do in their day-to-day lives. So when we're planning for behaviour change, we need to go about it systematically. We need to identify specific actions we want people to take. We need to identify then the specific actors and the roles they play. We need to find out what their key motivations are, what's important to them, what are the things that encourage them to get out of bed in the morning, and so on, and look to align with those. And then we need to investigate what capabilities do they have, what do they need, what do they have now, and what opportunities are there, and how we can reduce barriers to allowing motivated behaviour to happen. I'll finish here to allow time for discussion. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant, that was great. So if you do have any questions for Niamh, we will get in touch and hopefully answer some of those in the post-event email. But we've luckily got Alice on the line to answer as many questions as possible. I think we've got about 10 minutes, so we'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. Looking at the highest voted question, it's from Emily Reed. The question is, I'd be interested to hear any perspectives on responding to backlash to encouraging behaviour change, e.g. protests against 20-minute neighbourhoods and conflating these with restrictions of freedom more generally and doubts about climate science?
Such a powerful question. I can see exactly why it'd be upvoted, because many of us have experienced that kind of pushback on rational, logical, very well-intentioned activities. I'm not sure how you then deal with backlash once it's occurred, but if you've ever been in that situation, then you will know that by the time you get to the pushback, it's all a bit too late and difficult anyway. And I guess this may not be the most helpful answer to the question, but I genuinely think that if we think about what the motivations are for the variety of stakeholders involved, and think about how what the action that we'd like to see, for example, traffic-free neighbourhoods have been the classic issue here, working with the motivations of as many stakeholders as possible. So that might well be supporting parents and families and children in using the space of a traffic-free neighbourhood to make it as positive as possible experience for them as well, while also actively helping the excluded traffic to still access the services and routes and the options that they wanted to get at, so that you align as many motivations as possible. And even if you are having a negative impact on one person's desired behaviour, if you understand why they're taking that behaviour, so a rat run is there because of congestion somewhere else, then thinking about, can we at the same time tackle the congestion issue with phasing of traffic lights, or thinking about these broader systems issues, I think are really important to avoid or minimize the risk of getting to those awful backlash situations where nobody wins in the end.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of understanding the motivations of the many before actually implementing the solutions. So the second highest voted question was from Simon. The public sector are traditionally adverse to risk, which I'm sure a lot of other sectors are. I used to work in the water sector. They were averse to risk as well, often waiting for another organisation to take the plunge before doing it themselves. What are the tips for de-risking early stage innovations enough for public sector to take them on board?
This is, again, a really pertinent question and a great focus. I think, again, the knowing who's taking the decisions about and who's bearing the risk is really important. So, for example, in the area that I work in owner-occupier retrofit, then the additional cost of that an installer may apply to what they feel is unproven technology is borne entirely, and the risk that it'll go, if not horribly wrong, that it'll need more snagging to commission it and get it working effectively. So that those risks are borne by the client and by the installer, and the installer's massively dependent on local reputation to continue winning work. So there's also something there that's pushing against innovation, because if something goes horribly wrong, they lose out financially and they lose out longer term in reputation. And I think there are some opportunities here for in the private owner-occupier space, the mortgage providers or loan providers who might well be supporting property innovation, and in local authorities, it will be about the financing of those, allowing some headspace for additional, and it's usually labour rather than capital, so that all the people needed to make that innovation effective have the bit of headroom in terms of time to go up the learning curve together. And actually to go up together, so they learn together, and therefore, so there's something around allowing and costing in for the time to learn, and that might be through procurement, through finance or for procurement, and also just having that culture of, well, we're all finding out how this works, you know, rather than setting the expectation that it'll be glossy and fantastic first going through. And then there's also the supply chain aspects of that. And I often wonder about what's the role of the equipment manufacturer in actually covering some of that costs of going up the learning curve for their installers. What kind of labour is covered under the warranty conditions? Is there could their capital costs with associated VAT and all the rest of it, and VAT relief, actually cover some of the time taken for commissioning? So I think there are different ways in which you reduce different types of risk, and certainly financial risk is can be reduced through how you frame what it is you're purchasing. And if you're purchasing learning as well as kit, then you might well set up your procurement in different ways.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Alice. And I'm just gonna, looking at this, we've got a couple that have got 6 votes. So we'll go for the first one that had 6 votes. So as you say, the complexities of human decisions means that our own behaviour biases and knowledge often work against us. And these middle actors, those advising consulting, can you advise on intention or the action gap? Right.
So the intention action gap is very different for everyone. I think I'm going to helpfully reframe the question, which is something I know that social science academics kind of do, which is, I think the issue is, how can you align as much as possible the motivation, intention, action chain, rather than push forwards towards an action and then discover there's a gap? So I would flip it around slightly and say, can we invest more time and effort in understanding what everybody wants out of the picture? So again, in my own area of research, a local builder is completely dependent on local reputation to win work, because their key motivation is, ideally, they never want to have to tender for software again, because writing a tender is time wasted that you don't get paid for. So once you've got that, you kind of say, well, how can we make it so that a low carbon outcome, a zero carbon heating supply is standard. So it's not a question of competitive edge, it's what you do. And therefore can you align the constraints around the action with the motivations? So they will do what is required in an area, and therefore, you know, they're in exactly the same arena as all the other people they want to influence and work with. So intention action gap is a real thing, and the way of minimizing it, I would say, is not to try and change intentions, but actually to understand what's driving people's actions and then align as much as possible around that. So mainstreaming, I think, is a critical idea that we could all work towards, and it might well change a number of the ways in which we, you know, describe services, describe products, and think about what we are purchasing and designing.
Brilliant, thank you for that. I'm just conscious of time. Alexandra's just put a note in saying that any unanswered questions will be taken offline and we'll address them in the follow-up email. So we will make every effort to answer every single question that's in the Q&A. At the moment, there's 25. So I think we'll bring it to a close right now because we're at 56 minutes past, and I'll hand it back over to Alexandra.
Yeah, hi everyone. Some really pertinent questions in the Q&A. I try to keep tab on all of them, but yeah, we won't be able to answer all of them today, and there's definite need to have a follow-up and maybe facilitate some collaboration amongst all the participants here. But we'll have to make a close for this webinar today, and Nilam and Alice and Sarah, if you could just maybe put your videos back on so people see who you are. Alice, thank you so much for your presentation today. You received many messages of thanks in the chat just after your presentation, and yeah, I'm really grateful we had you today as our speaker. We'll make sure to send Neve as well our thanks for her pre-recorded presentation today. And thank you, Sarah, for helping us on the ESRC side, for collaborating with us on this webinar series. And thank you, Nilam, for facilitating today. Michael has been behind the scenes helping with the technical issues and the whole event side. So thank you, Michael, as well. All right, that's all from me today. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email that comes with the recording, and any materials that we have, we'll share that in a follow-up email. And it was great to have you all today. Thank you so much.